we're talking about something which are called as holes. Okay, and it's more about pawn structures. So the idea is that I'll show you two games of Caro-Kann, and because it's kind of a good opening that teaches you about pawn structures. And the first game I'll show you is a game in which black has a very weak pawn on the A file, and then I'll show you how does black survives. And then later on, after black has survived that position, later on black tries to attack white's weak pawns. So e4, c6, d4, d5. And the first is Caro-Kann exchange. The second game that I'll be showing you will be Caro-Kann advanced. So that I've selected two games, and it keeps up good balance, right? So takes, and knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to d3, and then bishop g4. Everything pretty much theoretical. Pawn to c3 and queen to b6. The idea behind queen to b6 is that usually we like to play queen on b6 because that kind of doesn't allow the bishop to move very early, because it keeps up pressure on the b2 square. And the queen is usually, in such cases, in such pawn structure, the queen is usually very happy on the b6 square or also on the a5 square. But because white has already played c3, so queen likes to sit around on b6 square. White plays castles and pawn e6. Queen to p3. Now here white can give, black can give white a weakness on the king side. So bishop f3 is a threat, but first of all, if I go bishop f3, then white can play queen to b6 and a b6, then gf3, and both sides will have double pawns, right? Suppose if I start with this, then they have intermediate, and after take, they can take. So I'll be having double pawns and they are having double pawns. So it's not so good. How does black react? So black first of all captures, giving white the cluster, and then bishop f3, gf3. Now the idea is on the king side, this is a weakness. On the queen side, there's a cluster and rook is very happy. So I want to stop here for a moment to teach you a concept called holes, which you are already aware of, most of you. But I'll still put my point very clearly here, because when you see holes, holes are those squares which opponent pawns cannot protect. For example, hole, hole. This is a hole. That's a hole. Only in the opponent's camp, I'm saying. This is a hole. Sorry. This is not a hole, by the way, because this pawn can protect. This is a hole. This is a hole. This is a hole. All right. Now, is a4 a hole? No, because pawn can protect. Now, whenever you see holes, you should understand that the hole, that kind of hole will be weak, which is first of all on a semi-open file. Second of all, whenever you figure out a pawn which is controlling a hole, that's a very, very weak hole. Like suppose if I'm getting a chance to play pawn g5 without losing the pawn, and if I control this hole with my pawn, this becomes a very strong move for black. So black eventually wants to put pieces on the holes. It means black wants to put piece on the f4 square or on the h4 square. Also, black wants to support the piece by the pawn. Very important. So this is a very important idea when you see holes. Bishop d6. Now, as white wants to make sure that this becomes a weakness because it's on a semi-open file, and white wants to make sure that this becomes a weakness. So how will white try to think? First of all, it's a cluster. So white wants to play this b4, b5 move. And the moment b5 happens, I'm controlling this inference square of the pawn, but still this pawn is there that controls. So white makes a very interesting plan of provoking b6. And the moment b6 is provoked, a6 becomes a weakness. I'll show you the game now. b4, bishop to c7, bishop e3, knight f6, knight d2, king e7, because castling is not required as it is kind of the middle to end game. Queens are not there on the board. b5. Now knight d8, but knight won't have any other prospects. Knight cannot go to f7, e6 or c6, right? So knight to b8, because knight wants to come to d7. Knight b3, Bishop d6, knight c5, provoking b6. Now this is very important. And now white goes back. White has achieved what white wanted, to put a pawn on the b5 square and create holes. Now even black has multiple holes. One hole, second, third, fourth, 5, 6. Are there any further holes for black? Okay, this is also a hole, but a pawn is controlling, like a pawn is blocking it, right? d6 is also a hole. So out of these many holes, what is or are the weakest ones? Yes, Krishna?
So maybe c6 and a6 because there is a white pawn controlling those squares.
Yeah.
A6 and C6.
Exactly.
A6 and C6 because
Good job.
A6 all.
Good job. Now, if you have to compare between a6 and c6, you should find a6 is a weakness. Why? Because rook is also putting pressure.
Also.
And even though c file and a file both are semi-open, but only a file is a semi-open file for white. C file is a semi-open file for black, right? I will want to put my rook on c8 because I want to put to c file because opponent pawn is there. If rook comes on c1, this is like making no sense, right? Okay, so we figure out this is a hole. Suddenly you will realize whenever there's a hole, you have to put pieces rather than pawns. Knight to d7, nb d7. Rook a4. The idea is to bring other rook on a1. Rook c8, the idea is to go rook c7. And in this process, white has put the maximum pressure it can right now on the a7 square. Now, if it was possible for white to make sure that if white can increase pressure on the a7 square, then it was a good start for white. Okay, it was a good thing for white to play. But because in the game white could not do that, black was very fine in the game. So black started creating other side weaknesses. Now, what is the bad point of this position for black? The bad point is rook is stuck. And black will show in this game very nice method to free the rook. Bishop f1. Knight here. Why? Because it's very much the case. I want to put a knight on f4 and block it. Remember, always put pieces on the holes, not the pawns. Always remember that. Knight c1, knight f4. Now we have a piece on the hole, not the pawn. Knight a2. White is kind of doing some maneuver, but it's not so clear. Why? Because probably white should try to play knight b4, knight c6. At least white should try to do that. If knight b4, bishop b4, rook b4, and if this guy moves again, rook goes back. And this is again a kind of a weakness. That should have been tried by white, at least. Pawn g5. But white is not doing that. King d8. So white is trying to go to the other side. f6, king h1, knight f8, takes. Now, the point is, we can also put the bishop. But you know, anyways, even if you do this move, takes. Now, you cannot free the rook directly. I mean, even this position is kind of fine, but black wanted to keep some pieces because black realizes that these two are weaknesses and all these pawns, especially the f2 pawn, is a dark square pawn. So black wanted to keep the dark square bishops alive. So captured by the pawn. Rook a6. Rook to b7. And now what should be the idea here in order to free the a8 rook? So in order to free the a8 rook, you need a different piece that can control a7 pawn. One is the rook. A bishop cannot control. I mean, bishop can control, but it should not control because it will block the rook. So it will defeat the purpose, right? So what should be the idea? Like which piece can you figure out that can protect the a7 pawn and then only we can free our rook? So anyone has any plans here? Think. I'll give you 3 minutes to think here. I'm not asking exact specific moves. I'm just asking what should be a general plan of maneuvering the pieces here and there and freeing the a8 rook. Yes.
Sir, I think we should play first G6.
Very good. You found it. Very nice. Yes, that's correct. Say full variation.
And then to E7. Yeah, and then to
But the
C8.
problem is the rook is still there. So then you will have to play something like rook c7, rook b8, rook b7. Understood, all of you?
Yes, sir.
That's how you free your rook. And this is where, that's why I kind of like this game. Because it teaches you how do you make your very, very bad piece, which are stuck, into better pieces. So let's see the game now. Bishop goes here to attack the pawn, so obviously it needs to be protected. King e7. Now rook wants to enter on g7, so king f7 probably. Yeah. Rook goes back, and now the knight dance. f5 and knight to c8. And now rook will move somewhere, probably c7 or maybe d7, not so sure. But then rook b8, rook b7. Okay, he's trying to exchange the rooks. After pawn to c4, first of all, you should not take. Because remember, they are having the cluster. So they'll be happy to take by this pawn. So that is one moment of thought here. Rook b7, now c5. And this is where, again, why I have included this game. Again, this will take you you have to focus here to understand when should you take, when should you not. Remember, if you take, d pawn is going to come on c5. And suddenly, not just that, the b pawn will again be a passed pawn. Right now, b pawn is stuck because of the b7 pawn and b6 pawn. That's why the b5 pawn cannot move. But the moment you take it, and they take it, suddenly, this pawn becomes very, very strong. Okay, so I mean, takes knight c5, bc5, dc5, and then the bishop will be protecting this guy, and then the pawn is going to come on c6, b6, and this is not looking so comfortable for us, right? The other pawn will also start jumping around. So never take on c5 in this case if you know that the other pawn will also become a passed pawn. But let's imagine if the rook was not here, if these pawns were not here, if this pawn was isolated, then we can just take it. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Bishop back. c6. And now what is the difference? The difference is after c6, it is only protected by b5 pawn. But can this pawn go on c7? No, because the b5 pawn cannot go on b6. And now rook will move on somewhere, probably on e7. Rook goes back because again they want to enter from the g file. So again, let's exchange a couple of rooks. Check and exchange. Take 6. Now suddenly we are in the bishop knight minor piece endgames, let's say. Now in the minor piece endgame, the point is this a7 pawn is not a weakness anymore. The reason is, first of all, the light square bishop can never attack it. Second of all, the knight can never attack it because the entry points are blocked for the knight. So a7 pawn is automatically safe. Now, the second point is, remember this always, I guess I've already told you, it's called as overextension. Do you guys know the literal meaning of overextension? Like you see elastic, right? What do? Have you guys seen elastic strings?
Yes, sir.
So suppose if you stretch this much, it will come back, right? But suppose if you keep it stretching and you passed its elastic limit, will it ever come back? No, it will not come back. Similarly, in chess, the same thing can be said about the weaknesses. So, or the pawns. Suppose if you're playing an opening or a middle game, and if you're advancing the pawns, they're very good. They're like the elastic string. Because you're having pieces, they can support it. Suddenly, the moment you reach the end game, the same advanced pawns become weaknesses. Because there are not many pieces to protect, and that is where you have extended the elastic limit and the pawns cannot come back. And this is where the c6, b5 becomes a weakness. So now see how black again shifts the king all the way from the king side to the queen side and destroys the structure. See, c7 and now pawn a6. Takes knight a7 and just take on c6 and play pawn b5, king b6, king a6. Just to illustrate, that's the way. Suddenly, black is having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. White is having 5. Suddenly, white has one, like white is down a pawn. And the pawns that white lost are the only pawns what white was trying to use to create pressure. Are you understanding? In the middle game, these were the pawns that were creating pressure in the favor of white side. But elastic limit was crossed. What do I mean by this? It means when you are extending your pawns, don't exchange pieces. Now again, finally, again you will see the king walk all the way from the queen side to the h4 square and again attacking the pawns. See, all the way dancing like this, and now suddenly f2 is lost. So +2. And now it is very important to understand that never ever play h4. If you play h4, then it's kind of a draw. Then it's absolutely drawn. Even though you're +2, doesn't make sense. So never fix. So can you see this is a hole, right? So never ever put pawns on the hole. Put pieces on the holes. Only then you can enter. So game progresses. Some repetition. And now black decided to play h5 and king h4. See, at some point h5 and not h4, just king h4, because then we can go to the end game. Probably at some point we can take, and now this is finished. Now you can play whatever you feel like. This pawn is lost and this is a passer. I did not focus too much on the end game because there were lots of maneuvers, but I wanted to show you, because there were obviously many other ways to play this end game, but I wanted to show you that how do you play middle games and what should you do, what should you not do, and also holes. So this was the first game.